Thank you very much, Amoghasiddhi, and good morning, brothers all. So, each year for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been spending 2 or 3 weeks in Bodhgaya. And earlier this year, I went, as usual, for 2 weeks. Amoghasiddhi was with me for one of those weeks. And especially we spent 1 whole week almost entirely under the Bodhi tree. Every day in the morning we'd go to meditate at 6:30, and we would be there until lunchtime, and then we'd come back in the early afternoon and be there until the place closed in the evening. And we would go from one place to another, following the 7 weeks of the legend, at least, of the Buddha's period after his enlightenment. So we were going to different places and really dwelling with the Buddha in that period after his enlightenment, and his enlightenment too, come to that. About 50 of us, I think, from all over India. A very, very wonderful period. The retreat ended, and I was left there with Dharmashalin and Srimala and 1 or 2 others. So we went back to the Bodhi tree one last time, one last evening, and we went and sat just inside the parikrama, the walkway around the temple, at the foot of the Bodhi tree, just to one side of the Bodhi tree, if you know that area, just to the left of the Bodhi tree. We were sitting there, and in many ways it was a particularly unpropitious time to be there, because the official Chinese Buddhist Sangha were in, well, the only word is occupation. They'd completely taken over the area under the Bodhi tree, in the front of the Bodhi tree. Huge plastic banners in not especially good taste. And lines of tables with people sitting behind the tables doing a puja. Actually a very ancient puja, I think 1500-year-old puja. And no doubt with great enthusiasm, but intense insensitivity, they just took over. And they had the loudspeakers turned up to the point of, I was going to say to the point of unbearability, but beyond that. It was so awful that you couldn't even feel it was unbearable. It just completely dominated the whole area. I was with 2 of our gypsy friends from Hungary, and they said they immediately recognized the style. It was, communist era setup with the pujaris, what do you call them, the people officiating, sitting at the front behind tables with flowers and glasses of water and so forth, and then people sitting facing them. It was weird. Bodhgaya at the best of times is a bit of a mixed experience. There's this chaos and a kind of gross insensitivity in many, many ways, but this was transcendental. So we're sitting under the Bodhi tree, and at this point a whole lot of Burmese came. I think there must have been about 200 Burmese men, and they were pretty rough, but with a great intensity of devotion. It was clearly a visit that meant a huge amount to them. So they wanted to get close to the Bodhi tree, and we were a bit in the way. So, we moved right up to the railing, and they were crowding in behind us, and this curious mixture of really gross and unpleasant and intensely feelingful chanting, very, very rough. So we got the Burmese all around us. We got the Chinese doing a sort of Chinese country and western puja. It was really strange, with gongs. At this point, a whole lot of Thais came with a huge long robe, which they were going to present. And they were circumambulating the whole temple, and they had a loudspeaker at every seventh person. And so they were doing the standard the main verses from the Triratna Vandana just over and over. But of course they were slightly out of sync at every seventh pace, and one really felt that this was insupportable, unbearable, and the Greek cacophony really does it. Bad noise. You're, at the same time, you're at the feet of the Bodhi tree. It's a very strong Bodhgaya experience, this mixture of a sensory awfulness and a spiritual connection of very great depth and meaning. So sitting there, nose is right up against the railings around the tree, and the first time I really looked through at the Vajrasana. Between the temple and the tree, there's a stone slab going back to Ashoka, they think, nominally on the place where the Buddha sat and gained enlightenment. So with all this awfulness around us, looking through a sort of slit in the railing, just gazing at the Vajrasana. And Srimala was sitting next to me, and she said something like, "I can't believe it." And I knew exactly what she meant, that you're looking at the historical site as near as damn it to where the Buddha gained enlightenment. And yes, she said, unbelievable. I said, well, it's more incomprehensible, ungraspable. And I think unbelievable is quite a good word, because you're confronted with fact, and you're confronted with the interface, if you like, between fact and belief. But yes, I felt I couldn't grasp what had happened there. And I had, I think, the strongest experience I've ever had of a connection with the Buddha. Just looking at that spot with nothing on it. That's the strange thing about the Vajrasana. It's just a slab of stone, but it's, as it were, empty. There's nobody there. There's no image on it. There's no symbol on it. It's just an absence. And in that absence, there's more presence than I've ever felt in any other place or through any other medium. So this theme of the absence of the Buddha really struck me very strongly at the time. And I remember just gazing at the Vajrasana, and just the words coming through my mind, almost like a mantra. Well, like a mantra. My place is at your feet. My place is at your feet, from Bante's poem. Just an overwhelming sense that I was in contact with something that went so far beyond me that I had no means of comprehending it. But I was in a direct relationship with it through the absence of the Buddha. So absence and presence are very interesting themes, and the absence of the Buddha, I believe, is the key to the experience of the presence of the Buddha. Experiencing the Buddha's absence is the key to the experience of the Buddha's presence. And it's this that I want to dilate upon this morning, that I want to just talk about, ramble around. I've been meaning to prepare some notes for this talk, and I've been extremely busy until very recently. I came back from India just a week ago, and I've been cutting my caravan in half when I got back to Wales, so I didn't have time to prepare any notes for the talk. So I've come without any notes. I've got a bar of chocolate, but I haven't got any notes. So I'm just going to ramble and hope that my incoherent thoughts attain some sort of form in the course of talking. I hope that the Buddha's absence will inspire me and that I'll be able to communicate something to you of some, well, to me, very, very interesting reflections around this theme. Yeah, so absence and presence, the interface between them, the juxtaposition of them, almost you might say the identity of them. The Buddha's presence is most strongly felt when you experience his absence. We experience this in a more everyday sense. I'm at the moment staying in a room that's opposite Surata's room at the front of the house. I say Surata's room, but I have to use a bit of sort of effort to do that, because as far as I'm concerned, it's Bante's room. Bante lived there for what, it must have been 20 years. And I myself, for the 8 years that I was his secretary, would go pretty much daily, maybe more than once, into that room and sit with Bante. And even now, even though Surata's didgeridoo is outside it and through the door I can see the old curiosity shop of Surata's mind displayed around the place. But still, as far as I'm concerned, it's Bante's room. And I feel when I see that room and that Bante isn't there, I feel a connection with Bante. I feel Bante's presence. You see, it gets sometimes that when I go up to see Bante and he's not in his room. He's having a cup of tea or whatever. And you go in and his chair is there, that red plush chair that Windhorse Trading bought him, Windhorse Evolution bought him, whatever it was, 20, 30 years ago. Ruchiraketu, I remember, with Vajraketu. Oh, it's Friends Building Service. Carried it in behind Bante's back. It's still sitting there, this red plush chair. And you go in and you see the red plush chair there, and I feel towards that chair as if it was Bante. It sort of contains Bante. Bante's absence is his presence. So I find this theme extremely interesting. And I think the moments when one feels most distant from the Buddha, come to that, from Bante, are the moments when you have the greatest opportunity for connecting. In a way, you can't connect with the Buddha until you recognize that the Buddha is absent. Absent in the sense that he's no longer living, but absent also in the sense that he's beyond your ken. He's beyond your ability to grasp with at least mundane faculties. And it's only when you face that absence that presence can really manifest, the real presence. Sorry, Abhaya and other Catholics. Real presence here doesn't mean quite what it might mean in another context. But feeling the presence of the Buddha as a genuine experience, not merely a sort of sentimental association or a set of ideas, but as a direct connection from a deep spiritual imagination. So, thinking about this, I started to read around the topic of the connection that Buddhists have felt with the Buddha throughout Buddhist history, greatly aided by the ever-generous Padmavajra, who gave me a long, long reading list of articles and books and so forth that might bear on this topic. And what I found was that the issue of the Buddha's absence has, by implication at least, if not explicitly, been a huge issue for Buddhists pretty much from the start. Of course, initially the Buddha was there. The Buddha was there with people, although they couldn't be with him all the time. And we think of Pingya and his recognition that, well, the Buddha was always present for him. But But it seems as if fairly soon after the Buddha died, that issue of his absence became a pressing one. Buddhism is so much focused on the Buddha. Even today, we call the religion Buddhism. We focus it on the Buddha. Of course, it hasn't always been thought of like that. It's been thought of as Dharma. But still, today we identify the religion we practice, the spiritual tradition that we practice, with the Buddha. He's so central to what Buddhism is. It's all focused on him as teacher and on him as goal, as the one who's attained what we all want to attain, at least sometimes. So he's very much, present in that sense. There's no Buddhism without the Buddha. Take the Buddha out of Buddhism, there's no Buddha. There's no Buddhism. It's just a collection of maybe psychological teachings, maybe even lower level spiritual teachings. But without the Buddha, it's not Buddhism, it's not the Dharma. So very early on, it seems as if people felt an intense sort of lack, an intense desire to see the Buddha. There's a very lovely story of in the sub-commentaries of the period around the parinirvana. So after the Buddha had died, after he'd been cremated, some of the monks were together, and Ananda was there, and back in Shravasti, and one of the young monks was just weeping and weeping and weeping and saying, the Buddha has gone, the Buddha has gone, the Buddha has left us. We are alone. I've not yet finished what I've got to do. What will I do without the Buddha? And Ananda was there listening, and he sort of, one imagines, sort of shook his head and just went off to the Ganda kuti. Now, you know that the Buddha at Shravasti had a special hut, according to commentarial and sub-commentarial tradition. There was a special hut that was set aside for him, and we even got something of the dimensions of it and so forth. And you can see a replica of it at Shravasti today. And that hut was every day filled with flowers by lay people in the afternoon. So it was called the Ganda kuti, which means the sweet smelling, the perfumed hut or chamber. And so Ananda, who is the Buddha's attendant, went to that hut, went to that chamber. He swept it out, he changed the toilet water, he changed the drinking water, he remade the Buddha's bed, he made everything ready. And as he was sweeping, he was sort of saying to himself, I don't know what they're talking about. I don't know what they're talking about. The Buddha's gone. The Buddha's here all the time. So there you get the contrast between the Buddha's absence and the Buddha's presence. For that young monk, the Buddha was absent. For that a man who lived so closely with the Buddha, and who, according to Mahayana tradition, is much more of a hero than he appears in some of the Pali tradition, he felt he was with the Buddha all the time. The Buddha was a presence for him all the time. It was very interesting because the idea of the Ganda kuti takes on quite a strong life. And you get Ganda kutis in other places where the Buddha had been. So in other centres where there were so-called monasteries, Sangha and so forth, where the Buddha had lived, you will get a place that was set aside and that was called the Ganda kuti. And according to things I've read, the Tibetans refer to the Mahabodhi temple in Tibetan as the Ganda kuti. And apparently they refer to their own shrine halls as, whatever it is in Tibetan, Ganda kuti. I think it is a word in Tibetan that then joined with kuti. So this is a Ganda kuti. And the whole tradition of special places where you had later on, much later on, probably only from the first or second century of the Common Era, you had a Buddha image. These places were set aside as the place that belonged to the Buddha, the Ganda kuti, the place where the Buddha would take up his abode. And I've seen in some of the ruined monasteries in different places in India. I remember Lakeshwar and I saw in Sirpur and in Vishakhapatnam, outside Vishakhapatnam. You see a ruined monastery, and there'll be a quadrangle, a bit like an Oxford or Cambridge college, with cells all the way around. And then at one end, in the middle of one end, there'll be a cell that is twice the size of the others. And if you go into it, what you'll see is at least the remains of a huge Buddha image. So the whole kuti was filled by the image. It wasn't a meditation hall. It wasn't a place you could go into to sit and meditate. You'd be squeezed up against the Buddha's knees. We did it in Sirpur. It was the place where the Buddha lived, and you lived with the Buddha. So it was the place that preserved, as it were, the Buddha's absence, so that you could experience his presence. Very, very interesting. The whole tradition of Ganda kuti is really interesting. I'd like to find out much more about it. There are traditions that the Buddha himself travelled in the Ganda kuti as a sort of TARDIS for the British, a sort of magic vehicle that he would move around in. It sometimes was formed of flowers. Extremely beautiful image. So sometimes you will see in murals, in reliefs, you'll see the Buddha sitting in a sort of a kind of architectural form which is made of flowers. And this was the Ganda kuti. And apparently he could rise up in it and move to another place. But that's very significant, isn't it? It becomes the vehicle for the Buddha's absent presence to manifest, if you see what I mean. So, yes, we've got all those sort of traditions. Many, many other things of this kind. It's very, very interesting. In early Buddhism, there were no Buddha images. If you look at Sanchi, if you look at Amaravati, you begin to see them at Amaravati because that's a bit later. But if you look at most of the older Buddhist remains, if you find Buddha images, they themselves will be much later. Apparently for the first 300, 400, 500 years, scholars of course get PhDs on the basis of disagreeing about the datings, there were no Buddha images. And a lot of ink has been spilt on why. And there's something I've read quite recently. It sort of points out that most of the discussion is premised on the fact that they were too primitive to have got to it yet. But clearly they weren't. They had an enormous plastic ability. The some of the moulding of the reliefs is really beautiful and very, very fine. It's not our aesthetic. It's not a Greco-Roman aesthetic, but very, very finely done with extremely good workmanship and a very strong sense of the human body. So it wasn't a lack of ability. And what I've come to suspect, and what a number of scholars I've read suggest, is that it was very conscious. They felt that it wasn't a sort of iconoclastic urge. It wasn't a feeling that was sacrilegious to portray the Buddha, as in Islam or in Judaism or as in the iconoclastic traditions of Christianity, even in Protestantism to some extent. It was more a feeling of inadequacy. The inadequacy of the form, the human form, to communicate what the Buddha had become. And so they felt it was better to sort of suggest his absence. These are, of course, not words that I'm getting from anything they said, because they're mute. They're only eloquent in stone. We don't know what they said about it, how they thought about it. But it seems to me that this is a better guess at what was going on than sort of looking at it as aesthetic impoverishment or primitivism. They deliberately put a stupa with all the worshippers around the stupa, hanging garlands on the stupa, folded hands, anjali, bowing before the stupa, because that communicated to them far more effectively the mysterious transcendence that had ensued after the Buddha's parinirvana. Because that's the basic issue, isn't it, for us? That the Buddha himself said, you cannot even think. You've got no way of thinking about what's going to happen after I've died. You've got no approach to it. I'm neither, after a Tathagata dies, he neither is nor is not, etc. You're up against a conceptual or even, in a sense, imaginative brick wall, or a precipice, maybe better. Where to go after that? How can you approach what the Buddha is? And it seems as if the early Buddhists felt that what the Buddha was better, more eloquently expressed by his absence, or by architectural symbols, or by symbols like a footprint, which in a sense are architectural, or a wheel, or a tree, all of which imply something that's not there, that you can't see, that can't be known by the human faculties. So early Buddhism, for several hundred years, seemed to feel this was the best way of communicating who the Buddha was, what he was, and communicating the attitude that was appropriate to him, the attitude of intense devotion and love and respect, reverence, very great generosity. The best way of representing the focus for all this was by a kind of absence. So as time went on, people began to represent the Buddha, but what begins to become clear is that the issue of the Buddha's absence became more and more sharp. If you look at early Mahayana texts, the impression I get, on a not particularly scientific survey, is that people were feeling more and more, we want to see a Buddha. Yes, the Buddha lived. Yes, the Buddha has transcended our knowing, which doesn't mean that he's not. It just means that we can't know him. But we want to see one. A certain sort of pragmatism entered in. And what began to take place was that they began to think that, well, yes, our Buddha has entered parinirvana, but we're taught by the Buddha himself that there are countless Buddhas throughout the infinitudes of space, and that those countless Buddhas are themselves teaching the Dharma. Right now, somewhere or other, in many places throughout the infinitudes of space, there are Buddhas who are sitting in the midst of their assembly and they're teaching the Dhamma. They're turning the wheel of the Dhamma. I want to see one of them. Tell me how I can get there. This seems to be the question that, the way the question began to confront people. How do we see the Buddha? How do we get to be in the presence of the Buddha? Because if we can be in the presence of the Buddha, well, we would be transported into the realms of enlightenment. We would be, our own progress would be accelerated by our contact with the Buddha. And many of the early suttas are to do with how you get in contact with the Buddha. One of the most seminal from what I've been reading, is the Pratyutpana Samadhi Sutra, the sutra of the immediate experience of the Buddhas of the present. And it gives the way to connect with them. The Buddha himself, according to the text, taught how in future ages you can get to be with a Buddha. He's sort of giving solace to his disciples by saying, don't worry, after I've gone, you can still find a Buddha. They're there. You just got to look for them. My own impression is people took this quite literally. They thought that if you go far enough to the west, you go through Wales and you end up in Sukhavati. Quite close, actually, but that's another question. Yes, the Welsh for Sukhavati is Maesgwyn, and that's where I live. So yes, they thought of it. My impression is they thought of it quite concretely, and the question came: how do you get there? How do you actually get into the presence of the Buddha, one of these Buddhas? So what the Buddha says is, well, first of all, you've got to know their address. You've got to know where they lie. You've got to know their name. You've got to know their particular qualities. And then you just have to want to see them. And you just have to say their name with intense longing, and you'll be there. You'll be there. Amitayus will appear to you. You will be in his Pure Land, and you'll hear him preach the Dharma directly. And it says that, well, if you do it for at least 7 days, I think you have to be standing up and not eating. And even that is after 3 months of intense preparation, which involves quite a lot of standing up and not eating. Amitayus will appear. You say his name, you think of his qualities, and he's there. So from this, the whole tradition of what we call visualization, which is perhaps a quite unfortunate misnomer, but these practices that are intended to bring you into the presence of the Buddha, these became more and more common. And you end up with, in the Tibetan tradition, the epiphany of so many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, all of which are taken in the traditional context quite literally as existing here and there, maybe even having spatial location, although it's a very sophisticated form of literalism, if you see what I mean. The Pratyutpana Samadhi Sutra is extremely interesting for its blending of this sort of devotional, imaginative, meditative quest with a very strong shunyata analysis, and using especially the fact that you have a real experience of being with the Buddha, but no Buddha is there, as a source of insight. And some very interesting discussion on dreams and the dream analogy as a way of understanding what's happening in the experience of being with Amitayus. But that's a whole other story, a very interesting one. I'll explore that a little in the meditation this afternoon. So yes, people from the Indo-Tibetan tradition, they, as it were, explored this further and further, and the whole tradition is really about how you get into the presence of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, which is really pretty much equivalent in the end when it comes down to it. In the Far Eastern tradition, they took up the particular strand of Amitayus and Amitabha. And the Pratyutpana Samadhi Sutra precedes the Amitaya Dhyana Sutras and the Sukhavati Vyuha Sutras, and may or may not have been influential in their development. But you get from that a whole tradition which is almost supervenient in the Far East. In China and Japan, you'll hardly find a Buddhist, from what I understand, who does not center their practice on Amitabha and calling Amitabha. and Namo Amitofo. And feeling that through that, they're coming into the direct presence of Amitabha, or they're giving themselves access to the direct presence of Amitabha. So all the traditions that have come down to us and that we're reasonably familiar with, we're especially familiar with the Mahayana practices that engage with the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, all of those come out of this very strong sense of the Buddha's absence and a very strong desire to be with the Buddha. You remember in the Sutra of Golden Light, the words that are now in the puja, that Sutra of Golden Light puja. Constantly I recollect the Buddha. Constantly I long for a sight of him. Weeping pitifully for the sake of the leader, I long for a sight of him. So it's that sense of absence and a longing to reach from that absence to a presence that has animated really the whole Mahayana tradition. You get something similar in Theravada, but in a more restrained way and much more focused on the actual historical Buddha. Although, interestingly enough, in the Theravada, what do they call them? Manusi Buddhas, the past Buddhas, are also very important. So at the Shwedagon Pagoda, you'll find there's a shrine on one quarter to Shakyamuni and then to three of the other Buddhas who are all said to have been there. So they've followed up this quest for the Buddha in a different way. We're mainly familiar with the quest for the Buddha through the Mahayana traditions. But we've been discussing recently how we, as modern men and women, both East and West, because in a different way the problems face people in India, the same problems face people in India for slightly different reasons as face us here in the West. The access to the imaginative realm is made complicated by Hinduism. But we all of us need to try to experience a connection with the Buddha. Bhante's made this very, very clear in his recent pronouncements, that unless we have a sense of the Buddha's presence, our spiritual life is merely a refinement of our own self-identity and therefore our self-clinging. So it's, maybe a much better self, and who knows, that could be a good thing, but it's not really a going beyond self. You're just making yourself more and more positive, more and more open and so forth, but you're not giving up self, you're not transcending self. We need to have a direct connection with what goes beyond ourselves, which is, in the first place, represented by the Buddha and by what he attained, and then by all those symbols and images that represent the inner dimension of what he attained. So we need to find our own way into this. Some are able to do it through the forms that have come down through Tibetan Buddhism or Chinese Buddhism or whatever. But I think most of us only can do that to a limited extent. And that if we really want Buddhism to live much more widely in the modern world, in India as much as here, we need to rediscover the ways into connecting with the Buddha's presence. And I believe that this issue of the Buddha's absence is a key. The traditions that have come down to us because of people's strong feeling of a lack, a strong feeling of an absence in their lives, a strong sense when they visited the holy places that it happened in the past. It's not happening now. A very great desire to be with the Buddha. And then, they dealt with that in the using the imaginative and cultural resources that were available to them at that time. some of which translate into our times, many of which do not. We cannot engage in the same literal perspective on things, most of us, and we certainly can't expect others to accept that literalism. So we have to find new ways of engaging with the Buddha that are not incompatible with the traditional ways, but that emerge more directly out of our own intense desire to be with the Buddha, our own intense sense of the Buddha's absence, and our strong quest to find the Buddha, in our experience, to find the Buddha in our environment, to find him in tradition. In so many ways, we'll be looking more at these ways on the combined convention. We need, though, to start with a sense of absence. That, of course, means starting with a sense of our own inadequacy, our own lack of enlightenment. Shinran is very interesting about this, isn't he? What's the term? Bompu, the ordinary, something like stupid, ignorant person. The ideal Shin practitioner sort of recognizes himself like that. But it's not a bit of, late Christianity. They're quite different sort of cultural context. It's not a kind of guilt-ridden feeling. It's just an honest recognition of who you are. You're a conditioned being. We are conditioned beings. We're funny little egos. Aren't we funny? I usually find other people funny, but every now and again you see it in yourself. These weird little tricks you play on yourself, these weird sort of reactions you have to other people, this strange importance that you attach to yourself. Am I a stream entrant or not? I find that weird. All that sort of preoccupation with your own attainments and so forth that you get imported into Buddhism. It's really quite comical. And it all emerges out of, it requires us rather to fully, directly recognize where we are at in a quite confident, extremely positive, healthy way. We are not enlightened. Bus. That's the fact of it. We're not. Because we recognize that, we can be enlightened. Because we recognize the Buddha is absent, we can experience the Buddha. We can, through recognizing the Buddha's absence, we can experience the Buddha's presence. So, to me, it's this Buddha's absence that is, in a way, even more interesting than the Buddha's presence. It's the absence that you experience on the empty throne at Bodhgaya. The absence you experience in a number of other places. For instance, in South Delhi, near the Baha'i temple that many people will know about, there's the site where, according to a rock inscription there, the Buddha preached the Satipatthana Sutta. And it's a dirty little park, and, parks in India come dirty always, but this one is an especially dirty and scruffy little park. It's got no sign up outside it. There's just an Archaeological Society of India, Archaeological Survey of India placard telling you not to spit and things like that. It doesn't tell you what's there or why it's there. There's just a rock outcrop in the middle of this park, in the middle of a South Delhi suburb, a kind of lower middle class flats all around. Really noisy, dirty, scruffy. I went there when it was 44 degrees and the rocks were absolutely baking hot. And just on the top of the rocks there's a little Archaeological Survey of India concrete shelter, really crude and ugly with the reinforcing rods sticking out. And underneath that, in the top of the rock, there's a plastic plate. Underneath that, in the living rock, is an Ashokan inscription saying this is where the Buddha preached the Satipatthana Sutta. And there's nothing apart from that. And yes, I think for me, the absence of any sort of decoration and formality and recognition was more eloquent than if there had been giant stupas and so forth. The absence of anything, this is the stage setting, and you have to bring the actors yourself. You have to conjure them from your spiritual imagination. You have to bring the presence of the Buddha from your own spiritual resources. And it's the clearer we acknowledge the absence of the Buddha, the more fully we will experience the presence. The more clearly we acknowledge our own unenlightenment, the more we will connect with enlightenment. And we, I think, have a duty really to go back to the core of what the tradition did in creating all these images and these traditions and these practices, which is to recollect the Buddha on the basis of a longing to be with him because we feel his absence. The whole tradition of Buddhanusmriti, of course, goes back to the Buddha himself. He taught Buddhanusmriti to Mahanama, interestingly, to a layman. And he said that you should remember the Buddha even in the midst of your family surrounded by children. It's the first, only place where I've seen anything like that said. But you remember the Buddha at all times. And he gives the verses of the Buddha Vandana as the means of doing that, reflecting on the qualities of Bhagava, Arahang, Sammasambuddhassa, and so on. You get that quest for recollecting the Buddha then carried through. The Nembutsu, the Namo Amitofo, what is it in Japanese? Namo Amida Butsu, that is described as Nembutsu, which comes from the Chinese Nyan Fo. Fo means Buddha, Nyan means recollection. So Nyan Fo and Nembutsu translate Buddhanusmriti. In Japanese there are other connotations of Nem, but the principal etymological, or rather sort of historical root is from the Sanskrit Buddhanusmriti. So recollection of the Buddha is a central practice of Buddhism all the way through. And Buddhists have found their own ways of recollecting the Buddha, but always based upon their sense of the Buddha's absence. So I'd like to invite us all to reflect on these two terms, absence and presence. Bhante says that the important thing is not seeing something, it's not visualization, it's experiencing the Buddha's presence. But I think you'll only experience the Buddha's presence if you feel the Buddha's absence and long to have that absence filled by presence. So I suggest that this is the heart of the issue when one looks at Buddhist tradition. This is the heart of the issue, the nexus between absence and presence. I was interested yesterday. Lokeshvara told us that there is to be a Buddha image sitting there, and it's not Pecha Priya. Close, but not close enough. And he sort of mentioned that there was going to be an image there standing forward, and I immediately felt something. There. And I wonder if I'll be able to feel as much once there actually is a figure there. So I think it'd be very good if from time to time we had shrine rooms which just had empty thrones. And there are some Buddhist traditions that pursue this practice. The empty throne, that could have been a title to my talk. So I invite us all to gaze at the empty throne and look longingly upon it and invite the Buddha's presence to fill that throne. Namo Buddhaya.